AtlantaFalcons.com breaking down the first round of the 2025 draft. We got Tori McElhaney and Will McFadden here. I'm Derek Rackley. I got a different crew here because I'm normally with Shock and Arch here. But it's great to be with you guys because it has been an exciting first round of the draft. Coming into it, there was a couple of predictions I think a lot of people made. This was not the prediction that I made, that Atlanta Falcons was going to make a move to get back into the first round for their second pick. We'll break it all down, but we're going to start chronologically. But before we get into that, y'all, I want to break it down, just your initial thoughts, right? Just initial thoughts of the first round, not necessarily the player, but like after you've had a chance to kind of swallow things a little bit, your first thoughts are...
This defense took a step in the right direction.
Definitely took a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think when you look at the two players that were acquired, these are two players that I think fundamentally what they want to do is disrupt the quarterback, get after the quarterback. But they do it and they go about it in very different ways. The makeup and the character and the drive and just them physically, so different, almost polar opposites. And yet the goal is to get after the passer. And I think like that is the ultimate goal of what Atlanta set out to do this offseason. They've got to get after the quarterback. They cannot stay where they've been in terms of a pass rush unit. They had to go and make a big move, and this was the big move.
Will, before we sat down in this room, you and I were talking a little bit, and it seemed like the last 2 years there was a couple of, I guess you could call them surprises. I mean, you're coming off a year where Tyler Algier ends up rushing for over 1,000 yards, and all of a sudden they're like, running back, first round. And then we're like, oh, that's kind of a head scratcher. I mean, we know Bijan Robinson's a good player, and then obviously we've turned out a couple of years later, he's one of the best running backs in the NFL. And then last year it was like, yeah, we bring in Kirk Cousins in the offseason, great free agent addition. We've got a veteran quarterback that's going to stabilize the offense, and then it's first-round quarterback. And it was kind of like a little bit of a head-scratcher, whereas this year it was like we're going into it saying edge rusher's a need, edge rusher's a need. By the way, I think they said that last year, that edge rusher was a need. But this year, Will, edge rusher was not only a need, but it was addressed in the first round.
100%, yeah. And I think the biggest thing with those last two players that you mentioned, Bijan and Michael Penix, the word conviction was used a lot with both of those picks. And it was, I think, mostly mentioned with James Pearce, but the way they spoke about Jalon Walker, you could feel the conviction that they had.
Yeah.
And then also when you look back at last offseason, what was the primary need? Quarterback.
Yeah.
They double dipped.
Yeah.
They made sure that they addressed that need. I love what they did tonight because we all came into this saying you got to fix the pass rush. Guess what? Pass rush has a lot more juice to it right now than it did coming into tonight. So I'm pretty happy, Rack.
Yeah, I mean, this was obviously there was a couple of free agent additions brought onto this defense to help that side of the football, help defensive line, help pass rush. But you figured they still needed that young, new blood, the talent. In first round is where you're going to get some of the best athletes, some of the best tools to work with to help that out. So, Tori, let's start with Jalon Walker. And I think a lot of times when it comes to drafting, I will say I'm number one to say that I said the Falcons were going to trade back out of 15, back into the 20s to try to get more capital, okay? The only thing that I got right was there was a trade, okay? It was the wrong direction. I had the wrong guy. I thought they were going to pick Michael Williams. He was gone way before then.
Yeah, you both did.
I think I had saw that he was mocked anywhere from like 8 to 28, right? There was a big range in Michael Williams, but he ends up going really early on in the process. But let's start with Jalon Walker, because the one thing I did say on the pre-draft show today was if for whatever reason he is still there at 15, you run the card up to the commissioner. And as I was watching the draft, Tori, it was all of a sudden like 10, 11, 12, no Jalon Walker. Jalon Walker's still on the board, and all of a sudden you're at 15 and Jalon Walker's still on the board. And I was like, oh my gosh, this might just work out for them.
Yeah.
Was it a similar thought for you?
Absolutely. I was shocked that he fell to 15. And I'm sure people have heard me say this. They've seen me write it over and over. I never once thought that Jalon Walker was going to get past the Carolina Panthers at 8. I never thought that was going to happen. Knowing their needs, knowing what I think they valued in terms of an edge rusher and a presence, and also looking at all of the impact players that they added to their defense during free agency, I was like, Jalon Walker's just the icing on the cake for the Carolina Panthers. I had no doubt that he was going to, be there or not be there at 15. had no doubt. I even today tweeted, earlier today, 7 hours before the draft, I'm like, here are my top 5 players that I think the Falcons could get in the first round, and I didn't put Jalon Walker. And someone asked me, why did you not put Jalon Walker on there? And I was like, because he's not going to be there at 15. And sure enough, to your point, you just see no Jalon Walker, no Jalon Walker.
Yep.
He's still there. He's still there. And I think that when it all like boils down to it, Jalon Walker is the type of player that if you're Jeff Ulbrich, if you're Raheem Morris, you are excited to get a hold of him.
Yeah.
Because one, the character, the leader, the passion, it's all there. Everything. I talked to area scouts and position coaches, and I've actually spoken to Jeff Ulbrich about Jalon Walker and James Pearce, which we'll talk about later.
Yep.
But what stuck out was how much they fell in love with the player as much as they fell in love with the person when it comes to Jalon Walker.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that something that came up in my conversation with Jeff Ulbrich, and I don't want to spoil this because it was such a great conversation that you'll be able to check out on AtlantaFalcons.com. But it was such a great conversation because I asked him, I was like, this is a guy who all we talk about with Jalon Walker is how much of a Swiss Army knife he is, how he can do so many different things. You can line him up in so many different areas. He has such a diverse and versatile skill set.
Yep.
As a play caller, is that sometimes a difficult place to live? Where you almost don't want to throw too much at him, but you know he can do a lot. But how do you make sure that he's not drinking water out of a fire hydrant? Like that was, and he was like, you know what? Like there is something very specific. He was like, it's going to be a fun challenge for me as a defensive coordinator to find Jalon Walker a home in this defense.
Yeah.
Because he says as soon as I can find him a home, we can fine tune a lot of things and take his game from where it's already at, which is already at a good spot, and take it up a next level. And I think like that, if you're Jeff Ulbrich sitting there with Jalon Walker and Caden Ellis and having the ability to do some different things with both of them, that should be very exciting.
You know, it's almost like the man upstairs was playing tricks on me because in the pregame show I was saying when I was talking about Jalon Walker, basically in a joking sense that he's not going to be there, I was like, but wouldn't it be really good if you had an opportunity where you could put Jalon Walker behind the defensive line and put Caden Ellis up on the line of scrimmage to rush the passer because we know how much he likes to do that. And then the very next play, you put Jalon Walker on the line of scrimmage, put Caden Ellis back behind the defensive line, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's now what's going to happen. And Will, and I'm going to throw this out, and it's going to sound a little funny at the start, but you're going to understand what I mean. No doubt that the Jacksonville Jaguars obviously got a 2-for-1 player in Travis Hunter. But I almost feel like the Falcons got a 2-for-1 player in Jalon Walker because this guy comes up and he gets on the edge and he rushes just like any edge rusher that was in this draft. But he's also got the versatility, the athleticism, the speed, the tenacity to stand behind the defensive line and stay in your traditional inside linebacker position to fill gaps, meet running backs, cover backs coming out of the backfield, tight ends. You have this Swiss Army knife that's kind of a 2-for-1. You got a potential, and I don't necessarily want to say in middle linebacker, but you got an inside linebacker that has the skill set to be an edge rusher in one player.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we were talking when we were kind of going through each edge rusher and what they brought to the Falcons potentially. And with Jalon Walker, it was almost like everybody talks about the Vic Fangio defense, but it's almost like the attacking style of defense that you see in Minnesota. And I'm thinking of, you mentioned bringing Caden or Jalon up off the edge. What if they're both in that A gap? Yeah. And now you got James Pearce and you got Leonard Floyd or Arnold Ebiketie, and it's like, I can just picture this like kind of junkyard dog defense, I think is what I kind of called it back then, where you just get a bunch of guys standing up, staring at the quarterback, and you have no idea, is this one coming? Is that one coming? Yeah. Oh, they're all coming one play. Like I think, flexibility, creativity that it unlocks is just going to be so much fun to watch. But your point about having a player who can do everything in a Swiss Army knife, like, how many times have we seen that actually not really translate to the NFL? And I think that it's hard because that leap is substantial. And when you do a bunch of everything, you have to make that jump in like 5 or 6 different aspects of your game instead of maybe 1 or 2 that you're concentrating on. But Jeff Ulbrich is an amazing coach. He is an amazing teacher. I think he simplifies things in an excellent way for players as a former player himself. Raheem Morris, same type of teacher and coach who simplifies things and gets you to play fast. And the final piece is having Caden Ellis, somebody you can directly look at, watch tape from last year, see on the practice field. I do think that Jalon Walker is going to be much closer to fulfilling that vision of really being a Swiss Army knife type of player for all of those factors. So, yeah, again, I'm really excited for what he's going to bring to this defense.
Yeah, Jeff Ulbrich, obviously an excited defensive coordinator right now. But to your point, Will, I almost feel like Caden Ellis, him and Jesse Bates might be the next two most excited people in this organization, knowing that they've got, we're just still talking about Jalon Walker, but knowing that Caden has got Jalon next to him to talk to him, to mentor him, to teach him, to use the skill set that he brings to the table. Jesse Bates to know that he's got another dynamic linebacker / edge rusher in front of him that he can continue to help mentor. And think about what's going to happen in the film room with these guys, right? Two veterans that are going to be work with not only Jalon Walker, but also James Pearce as we transition to the second first-round pick that most of us had no idea was coming, is that Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot and the rest of that staff pulled off a monumental trade. They're giving up a first next year. They're giving up some capital, definitely. But they went all in to address a major need, and they trade back into the first round to take James Pearce out of Tennessee. I think, Tori, a lot of people, when they were laying out the edge rushers, it was like you could put probably a list of 5 guys or so down the list, and pretty much you're going to find James Pearce in that list, right? And I always say that when it comes down to this, you guys, myself, Arch, Shock, anybody else that has a platform, a microphone, can say who they think that you should pick, who they think the Falcons could pick. At the end of the day, they're the ones, the front office, the coaches, that get to talk to them one-on-one, that get to sit down with them in meeting rooms, that get to either fall in love or fall out of love with certain players. And they decided that James Pearce was their guy. So they trade back up and they get another premier pass rusher that played in the most challenging conference in the country in the SEC at Tennessee. What does James Pearce bring along with Jalon Walker?
So what's interesting is he's very different prototype of player. And he's huge. Like, that was something that I was talking to Jeff Ulbrich about. Was I was asking him kind of the juxtaposition between these two guys that he now has at his disposal. And he was talking about James Pearce Jr. and how the way he plays is so much faster and quicker and explosive than maybe what his size is. He's like, you think that he plays like a 6'1", 6 foot type of guy, maybe a smaller guy, but then you get in the room with him and he's 6'5", and you're looking straight up at him, and he's huge, and he's just a large individual. First off, has the length that we're talking about that I think could pair really nicely on the other side of Leonard Floyd, who also is someone who plays with so much length and has learned over years in this league how to best utilize that length. So I think learning from him is also going to be an interesting part of James Pearce Jr.'s development as a rookie. But the pick itself and the idea of the Falcons moving back into the first round specifically for James Pearce Jr., I think just from my conversations with people who were a part of that decision, is they truly feel like he was one of the best, if not the best, pure edge rushers in this class. I think there's been a lot made about the different types of edge rushers, and I know a lot of people are like, oh, it just depends on where you take somebody, depending on where specific teams are grading them, not necessarily like overarching consensus of the player. The Falcons feel like he was very high up on when they broke down the pods of edge rushers in this class that could go early. He was up there for them because they feel like he's a true 3-down guy. They feel like he is someone who. Interesting. Yeah, that's exactly what they said. And so I think that is something that when I think about, to your point, the conviction. You have to be convicted to move back into the first round to go get someone. I think there was a very, very strong conviction about James Pearce Jr. And I also think it's really interesting, too, because James Pearce Jr. is a guy, let's say a year and a half ago, is someone that a lot of people were mocking in the first 6 picks of the 2025 NFL draft. And so it's very interesting to see here we are a year later, and yes, it's a 26 overall pick and not maybe a 6 overall pick, but the mechanics and the explosiveness and the juice, that word juice came up over and over and over again when you're talking about James Pearce Jr. Like, that was worth it for the Falcons to give up their number 46 pick, their number 242, and a future first-round pick. They felt convicted in the juice of James Pearce Jr. in order to do that.
And they felt that now was the time to do it. Right? Like you could have sat back on your laurels and said, hey, we got Jalon Walker. We got a really good player in the first round. Let's go ahead and wait and see what's available for our second round pick. But they said, no, we're going all in because this is something that has to be fixed. I think it's not so much that they hear the noise, because every coach and personnel department will tell you that they're not paying attention to what's going on in the news, but they do pay attention to what's going on the tape. And they do pay attention to what's going on in the stats column. And when you're not affecting the quarterback the way that you need to have success in the National Football League, at some point it has to become a major need. And they clearly showed that it was a major need that needed to be addressed. You guys talked a little bit about Pearce. 6'5", 245 pounds, 4.47 40. That says suddenness to me.
Yeah.
It says athleticism
juice.
To me. It says juice.
It says juice.
It says ability.
You're
going
to get him one of those sweatpants that says like juicy on the back of it, aren't you?
Don't put
She's
it
gonna
past
have one
me.
of these like bedazzled hats.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
gonna say juice on it.
Yeah.
But Will, bringing in a guy like James Pearce, again, playing at a high-level SEC school against arguably some of the best tackles in the country each and every week. You know this guy's well-schooled. He's played against the best, and he's ready to come in here. And it goes back to kind of that mantra that Jeff Ulbrich is talking about, the very first one, is heart is going to have to be established early on. You're going to have to figure out what it takes to get him to tick. You're going to have to figure out how he learns the best. And then the rest of the defense is all going to have to rally around both of these new players and figure out how we're going to institute them into this defense to get them comfortable, number one, and number two, to get them to come screaming off the edge to make opposing quarterbacks nervous. That's goal number one with both of these guys.
Absolutely. But the way that you just laid all of that out, I think that the Falcons' plan for that has been awesome this offseason. We've heard Leonard Floyd said it, Raheem Morris has said it. They look at this pass rush as a little bit of a basketball rotation. And the players that they're acquiring, I really think work well in that type of environment. If you look at James Pearce, he only played like 34, 35 snaps a game over the last 2 seasons. That's not an every single down type of player. However, 107 pressures over the last 2 years, most in the SEC. So he is effective when he's out there on the field. You bring him in as a flamethrower, specific kind of designated pass rusher in year one. That's just year one, right? He's got the upside to do way more than that, but in 2025, all I need you to do, like you just said, is go get that quarterback as fast as you can, and he does it faster than pretty much anybody else. Like, cat-like is the word that like he brings to my mind, because he's almost like a wide receiver. I think I told you this, where it's like he doesn't want you to touch him. He hates
Right, yeah.
he hates being touched. And so he's out here, they're playing like two-hand touch football as a pass rusher, and he's dancing around everybody. And then on the other side, you got Jalon Walker just like zombie walking a dude right back into the lap of the quarterback. Yeah. You've got Arnold Ebiketie maybe coming around on a stun, or Leonard Floyd. Like, again, the vision for all of this, the way it could work together, the way it could work individually, just all of the pieces, you're seeing the dots kind of start getting connected. And like the defense feels night and day different. I know it's just been 2 picks, and I don't want to make too much about it.
Yeah.
But
they're first round picks.
I just feel so much better about this defense right now.
Something else too that you talking about, you know, James Pearce Jr. only having played 35-40% of snaps, but being so effective in that is not dissimilar to what Jalon Walker was for the University of Georgia. This is a guy who led in almost every single pass rush statistic for the University of Georgia. A very, very solid defense, but he only had the 7th most pass rush snaps on the team. So there are 6 other guys ahead of him that had more pass rush snaps, more pass rush opportunities, and yet it's Jalon Walker who is leading that group in every single pass rush metric, in the same way that James Pearce Jr. is doing the same thing at Tennessee.
Yeah.
They're
Efficiency.
Efficiency.
They're efficient rushers.
Yeah.
We are on an Atlanta Falcons podcast, right? So it's easy to take this next question or conversation as a quote-unquote homer. But I would also say that the draft is a time for optimism for every single team, and especially the first round is a time for optimism because you are arguably getting one of the most dynamic players in the college ranks that's coming to join your team, and he is likely fitting a need that you have. Now, obviously, there's the argument between best player available and need, but the Atlanta Falcons clearly addressed a need, and maybe we'll find out that we're a perfect marriage this year between best player available and a need. But I want to ask you guys this question, Tori. Mm-hmm. What is your scale, and I don't even know what it is, I'm making this up on as we go here. On a scale of 1 to 10, your optimism now for this defense is what?
Probably a 7.
A 7.
A 7, which I probably think there's fans out there that are like, a 7? Only a 7? But the thing is like I don't know what this defense is going to look like just yet.
Sure.
New defensive coordinator.
Yep.
2 new fresh face first round picks that are going to be a part of this, and also some new faces from free agency. Also, there's still more things that could happen in this year's draft, and there's more things that can happen in free agency down the road. They got Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons during training camp. Mm-hmm. So, I still am calm. I'm a little bit, I do tend to lead more pessimistic sometimes, so take that with a grain of salt. But I do think that it goes back to my first point, though. Overall, I think this defense took a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
We'll see if that pays off. You hope it pays off. And I'll be honest, my overall personal excitement level as someone who has mocked an edge rusher to the Falcons every year for the last 4 years. I'm so glad it finally happened, and not just finally happened, but happened twice in the first round. And that's nice. And I think too, just from the fan base's perspective, I think last year when we sat in this very podcast studio and we're trying to have the conversation about Michael Penix Jr. being taken at number 8 overall, and knowing how the fan base felt about that and the confusion, and how essentially the Atlanta Falcons organization shocked the world because they're like, what do you mean you're going to double dip? You already have Kirk Cousins. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And looking back on that decision, it's the right decision to make. But at the time, it's met so differently. Yeah. And so I think that's also why I'm a little bit hesitant, is because talking last year, it's like, okay, there's this optimism about Michael Penix, but we have no idea who he's going to become or when we're even going to see him.
Right.
With this group, with these 2 new edge rushers, these 2 new defensive players, it's like there is that optimism, there is that excitement, but what are you going to do when they're in the building? What is Jeff Ulbrich going to do with them? How do they change what this defense can do?
Tora, I didn't ask you if they were going to the Super Bowl.
I know.
Okay? I was just asking your optimism level here. Okay.
A 7.
Hey,
it's still a 7.
I'm just messing with you. Will, what's your optimism level score?
Will is super optimistic.
Right,
he is.
I am super optimistic.
I'm pessimistic. He's optimistic.
That's true. I can see the silver lining in anything. I mean, it's an 8 or a 9. I think if everything being taken with a grain of salt, right? I suddenly don't think that the Falcons are going to go out there and be like what the Denver Broncos were last year or anything like that. But I do think, again, you trust your biggest need in the biggest possible way. There's going to be excitement about both of these players. They're both players that I think do have some upside, but different ways that they can be used immediately. So you're better in 2025, but there's still the room to grow around them as those players. The one thing that I do think is interesting to note is the big turnaround that Atlanta had last year rushing the passer, I think had as much to do with their run defense as actually their pass rush, because we heard how many times Jimmy Lake kind of say, in order for your pass rush to be effective, you got to get teams into passing situations, right? So as nice as it is to have James Pearce, you got to get him on the field, and so to do that, you got to set teams back behind the 8 ball, and that is maybe the one area of this defense that I don't know if they've significantly improved in that way. So I'm curious to see how that all plays together and fits together. Can you get these pass rushers out on the field? But we still have some draft to go. So very excited for that specific aspect of this defense. And then, knowing that you got Jesse Bates on the back end patrolling the secondary, like, let's get him a few more errant passes his way, right?
No, I think it's a great point because, Will, when I look at this Falcons defense, and this is my personal opinion, people might disagree, but the areas that they needed to get better was affect the quarterback more.
Yep.
Okay, get off the field more on third down and create more takeaways. Okay, and if I look at what these two guys can help do, if they're being effective in what they were brought here to do, right, which is to affect the quarterback, make it difficult. Obviously, we'd like to see the quarterback on the ground, but if quarterbacks are scrambling for their lives and they're having to throw the ball out of bounds, or it's getting tipped at the line of scrimmage and then somebody's coming up with a interception, or the tip ends up causing a 3 and out, that is getting the job done and getting the opposing offense off the field, which is some of the best quarterbacks in the world, and it's giving your offense, which we know we have optimism on that side of the ball as well, giving them an opportunity to come back on the field to put points on the board, right?
Yeah.
So to me, both of these selections help you get closer to securing those three things that I talked about that need to get better if you want to get yourself into the postseason, right?
I think one other aspect of that is the mobile quarterback element, which the Falcons have played a lot of mobile quarterbacks over the last couple of years, right? And how many times have we seen that 3rd and 6 all of a sudden become a new set of downs? Yeah. Jalon Walker's closing speed is insane, right? James Pearce's burst up the field, he's going to cut off any type of escape route immediately. So
this defense just got a lot faster.
A lot faster,
Yes. So before we wrap it up, guys, let's just, again, now that we've kind of talked about both players, we talked about the trade, the move, again, so I think we would all agree that this defense has gotten better, right? And now, as we end up going to day 2 and day 3, I'm going to ask, because I was put on the spot as far as where do we go next after this. Pass rushers was addressed, okay? Do you guys foresee, as we get to this next pick on day 2, is it stay defense or does this end up being more wild card?
I'm going, and people may be shocked about this, I am going interior of defensive or offensive line.
Okay.
And yes, I will say offensive line. I think that there could be some good centers that may be at that, pick potentially on day 2.
Okay.
I think there are some defensive tackles who, because I still think as much as you put into this defensive line with Jalon Walker and James Pearce Jr., this defensive front, I still think you need a little bit extra body in the interior of this defensive line. And I would really like to see a big dude get
a big body in there.
A big body. And then also the other side of that is, okay, if you don't go defensive tackle, let's say, I would be okay with drafting a center.
Okay.
And because I want someone to come in and be this true competition for Ryan Newsel. They've said they feel comfortable and confident in Ryan Newsel, and I agree with that. I 100% agree with that. But you got to think about the future of it too.
Yep.
And I think that there are oftentimes a lot of good centers that come out of the 3rd round.
Yep. I like it.
Yeah.
Will, what's your initial thoughts?
I think I agree with Tori. I would have felt better about the cornerbacks if they were staying at 46. I don't really think that kind of at the tail end of the 3rd round, that's not where I like the strength of that position group particularly. So if you look at the interior of the defensive line, and I know who you really want. You want Ty Robinson out of Nebraska.
He's huge, and he's such a big dude. He's built like a tree trunk.
Like he literally is.
Yeah.
It's just insane.
And
he's immovable.
He plays so tough.
Yeah, but Josh Farmer is another player out of Florida State. Like I'd be happy with any of those types of players. Sure. But then, if you can get me a Jared Wilson out of Georgia, like that would be great as well. I would also throw a wide receiver. I think there's a chance that if you want to elevate that 3rd receiver, 4th receiver role, however they want to use Ray, that could be a good spot as well. So end of the 3rd round is interesting.
I was going into this thinking that the 3 needs were edge rusher and corner and linebacker. And then outside of that, wide receiver was the next one for me. I just felt like another speed threat on the outside, somebody to really
Penix likes to go deep,
force defenses to respect the speed, right? We saw Matthew Golden get drafted by the Packers today with the blazing speed. Like last year we saw the same thing by the Chiefs. You pick a guy, Xavier Worthy, that can absolutely take the top off the defense. That makes defensive backs, defensive coordinators have to think a little bit differently about their play calls. So maybe we'll see if that ends up factoring into day 2 or even day 3 for the Atlanta Falcons. But as we recap, day 1, Atlanta Falcons get not 1, but 2 first-round picks, both coming out of the SEC. Jalon Walker was the first selection at 15, and then Atlanta Falcons trade back into the first round, and they get James Pearce Jr. out of Tennessee to get 2 edge rushers for this 2025 draft class. So we'll see what the rest of this coaching staff and front office has in store for day 2 and day 3, but I think we would all 3 of us agree that it was a successful day 1. So thanks for joining us so much here on AtlantaFalcons.com, and guess what? We will have so much more coverage as we continue our way through this 2025 NFL Draft. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone.